Hello everyone, I am Dr. NAAC, HOD Humanities, Assistant Professor Sociology. Today I am going to acquaint you with the topic hypothesis. Let's begin. The literal meaning of the word hypothesis is a tentative statement about solution of any research problem. Now this word hypothesis is split into two, hypo which means tentative subject or the subject to be verified. When you talk about thesis is actually a statement about the solution of the program or the title of the topic of the research paper. So, when you talk about the operational meaning of hypothesis, hypo means composition of two or more variables which are to be tested or verified in our research process. There are certain definitions as per the scholars. Karelinger defines hypothesis as a description of the relationship of two or more variables. Lundberg says a hypothesis is a tentative generalization, the validity of which remains to be tested. It is the most elementary stages. The hypothesis may be any hunch, guess, imaginative idea or intuition whatsoever which becomes the basis of action or investigation in a research process or project. As per Townsend, hypothesis is suggested answer to any issue or a problem in the research process or studies. When you talk about hypothesis, it is impossible to generate in the absence of human thought. When you talk about the formulation of hypothesis in scientific study of societal problems, it is an important and strong aspect of research and which is utilized as per the content or the title or topic. Hypothesis give researcher a new direction in research study. In the absence of hypothesis, the researcher cannot move even a step further in his research study or project, because on the basis of this thinking or tentative guess, the researcher tries to know what is the reason behind the particular research he or she is conducting. Hypothesis is the definitive and fully planned path of the research process or study. Hypothesis is also helpful and useful in giving a definite direction to any research study. It is an educated guess about problem's solution or title of the research. Hypothesis shows a relationship between two or more variables which needs to be guessed, investigated for the finding of validity or truth. So, you can say hypothesis is a guess about the research problem or a statement that lacks variable or that does not explain how the variables are related to each other is no hypothesis in the scientific sense. Talking about the data collection and analysis revolves around the hypothesis. When hypothesis becomes true, it originates theory. Hypothesis is based on our previous experiences regarding the topic or based on the existing knowledge or review of literature related to the topic. Let's talk about the features or the nature of hypothesis. Hypothesis is more conceptual in nature. It's a verbal statement in a declarative form. Hypothesis can be tested, verifiable or falsifiable. Hypothesis is a prediction of consequences. You can also say there are three components of hypothesis. First is the variable or variables. Then second is the population or the universe of the study. The third one is the relationship between one or more variables. The other features or nature of hypothesis are it is considered valuable if even it is proven false, or when you say it is a null hypothesis. It indicates the tentative relationship between two or more variables. Hypothesis is not moral or ethical or never in a form of a question. Hypothesis is also a powerful tool of advancement which proceeds our knowledge consistent with existing knowledge and conducive to the further inquiry or testing. Here are some more characteristics of hypothesis talking about clarity, simplicity, specificity, related to available techniques, empiricism, and related with the existing theory. Certain other good characteristics of hypothesis are: it is never formulated in a form of a question. It should be empirically testable whether it is right or wrong, as it is a tentative guess. It should be specific and precise, or one can say it should be concise. It should specify variables between which the relationship has to be established. It should describe one issue only at a particular time. Let's talk about the importance of hypothesis. It helps in testing various theories. It serves as a great platform for the investigation activities. It provides guidance to the research work or study. It helps in knowing the need of the data. It explains the social phenomena. It helps in knowing the most suitable techniques of analysis. Proper formulation of hypothesis leads to proper conclusions. So, hypothesis in that case enhances the objectivity in research, works on the basis for future knowledge. Certain sources of hypothesis. When you talk about the sources, it could be a scientific theory, it could be cultural or folk thinking, it could be creative thinking or insight regarding the topic, it could be accumulated or collected facts, it could be the available research literature, it could be analogy, it could be a mental setup towards problem solving, it could be personal experiences, even it could be prejudice or certain kind of stereotypes. Let's talk about certain types of hypothesis in research. First of all, we talk about alternative hypothesis, then null hypothesis, simple hypothesis, complex hypothesis, empirical hypothesis or statistical hypothesis. When you talk about the major two hypotheses which is very prevalent in the research, the first one is the null hypothesis and the other one is the alternate hypothesis. Let's see further. When you are talking about the null hypothesis, it is a hypothesis which has no relationship. The null hypothesis answers no, and there is no effect in the population. It is denoted by HO. Null hypothesis is a claim that there is no relationship between any of the variables. The hypothesis includes phrases such as no effect, no difference, or you can even say no relationship between the variables. You can include equal, lesser than or greater than sign as well. Talking about certain examples of null hypothesis, suppose there is a question called, does parents' motivation impact the motivation of girls from going to school? So, let us talk about the variables here. When you are talking null hypothesis, in the context of null hypothesis, parents' motivation has no impact or effect on the motivation of girls from going to school. So, when it is statistically expressed, it is in this form, where HO is null hypothesis, 1 is the parents' motivation and 2 is the girl's motivation. Let us talk about the other hypothesis, that is the alternative hypothesis. It is just the opposite of null hypothesis. Alternative hypothesis claims there is an effect in the population. It claims that there is a relationship between 1 or 2 or whatever variables we have utilized in the hypothesis. It is denoted by H1 or HA. It includes the phrases such as an effect, a difference, or a relationship between variables. For example, talking about alternative hypothesis, when you say male worker will have more productivity than female workers, you can say H1. So, 1 is greater than 2. Okay. So, when you are saying H1, it is alternative hypothesis. When you are saying 1, so the you are talking about the productivity of male worker. When you are saying 2, you are talking about the productivity of the female worker. There is one more example in a pictorial form talking about the alternative and null hypothesis. So, the alternative hypothesis is a hypothesis which the researcher tries to prove. And when you are talking about null hypothesis, so the researcher tries to nullify or disprove this type of hypothesis. Let's talk about the different stages of hypothesis testing. The very first stage is known as experimentation. Research study focuses its study which is manageable and approachable to it and where we can test our hypothesis. So, the study gradually becomes more focused on its variables and influences on the variables so that hypothesis may be tested. In this procedure, the hypothesis can be disproved. Next is the rehearsal testing. The researcher should conduct a pre-testing or a rehearsal before going for the field or you can say data collection. The other stage is field research. To test and investigate the hypothesis, field work will be predetermined research methodology tool which is conducted through various sources. It could be interviews, it could be observations with the stakeholders, it could be in the form of questionnaires, survey, interview schedule or case studies. The documentation study may also happen in this particular stage called field research. Next comes the primary and secondary data information or you can say data analysis or interpretation. So, the primary or secondary data and the information available prior to the hypothesis testing may be used to ascertain the validity of the hypothesis itself. This is all. Thank you.